an exclusive YouTube-only episode of Robot Voices.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time we're tackling a topic that I know resonates with so many of you out there. Leading a small engineering team, working remotely, and trying to just keep up with everything. Yeah, the meetings, the constant need to, stay focused, and then making sure that everyone on the team's actually on the same page, especially when you're, distributed. It's a lot. We're diving deep into whether switching from Agile to a hybrid model, or even going full waterfall can actually be the answer to boosting your team's throughput, getting rid of some of those, those extra meetings, and ultimately helping your road team stay in sync and be productive. So, maybe, just maybe, the newer way isn't always the best way. I mean, think about it. Could a classic approach like waterfall actually be a better fit in some cases? To help us unpack all of this, we've got, an expert here with us. They know their stuff when it comes to software development methodologies, and they're going to help us, figure out, is this something that's worth considering? So let's get right to it.
I mean, what's the deal with agile versus waterfall? Like, what are those, fundamental differences?
It's all about understanding what each approach is really good at and, matching that to your specific project.
Okay, so like horses for courses.
Yeah, exactly. Agile is all about flexibility, iterating and really taking in customer feedback as you go. It really shines when those requirements are like moving targets and, you're expecting change to happen along the way.
So agile's like, I don't know, a nimble speedboat
Yeah.
zipping around those, unpredictable waters.
That's a good analogy. Whereas a waterfall, it's all about predictability, having those clear phases and really doing that upfront planning. It's more like, I don't know, a steady cargo ship,
Why?
built for transporting those large quantities of goods along a route that's like already been mapped out.
Okay, yeah. Agile for adaptability, waterfall for stability. Got it. But how do we know, like, which vessel is right for this particular situation?
Well, I mean, you already mentioned some key things, right? A small team, well-defined requirements.
Right.
That really suggests that the strengths of waterfall, that focus, that predictability, that could be a big plus.
You're saying that, like, with a smaller team, maybe all that constant adaptation that Agile encourages, maybe that's actually, like, working against us.
Yeah, think about it. All that context switching, it can really drain productivity, especially for a smaller group.
Yeah.
Waterfall lets everyone really zero in on one phase at a time. So fewer distractions, more focus.
Speaking of fewer distractions, less meetings, that would be a welcome change, wouldn't it? Could
Right.
Waterfall help us with that too?
Oh, absolutely. With Waterfall, the way you communicate and collaborate is more structured. It revolves around, milestones, handoffs, things like that. So you don't need to have those like constant check-ins or status updates.
That frees up a ton of time for people to actually,
Yes.
get work done. I like it. So we're seeing how Waterfall could help with, the throughput issue, maybe even cut down on those dreaded meetings. But what about keeping that remote team in sync? Wouldn't, less frequent interaction be a
Well,
problem there?
Actually, it can be the opposite. The structure of Waterfall can be really great for remote teams. Think about it. Those milestones and handoffs, those become your key sync points. It makes sure everyone is, literally on the same page, even when they're not physically together.
Hmm. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way. So Waterfall's looking pretty good in terms of focus, cutting back on meetings, and maybe even helping with the remote team coordination. But what about that whole inflexibility thing? Isn't Waterfall, notorious for being kind of rigid?
Yeah.
What happens if, those requirements DO change mid-project?
You're right. That's a very valid concern. And that's why we need to talk about a hybrid approach, something that combines that, that structure and predictability of Waterfall with the adaptability of Agile.
Okay, so a hybrid approach.
Yeah.
The best of both worlds. I'm listening. Tell me more about how this actually works.
Imagine like building a house. You've got the solid foundation, that clear blueprint, that's Waterfall. But within each room, you've got the freedom to, you know, adjust the layout, play around with the decor. That's where Agile comes in.
Okay, I like that. So how would that translate to, a software development project?
You'd start by dividing your project into distinct phases, like requirements, design, development, testing, and then that final deployment. Those phases, those become your high-level waterfall milestones. They provide that, overall structure and predictability.
So those milestones are like the walls of our house,
Right.
defining the boundaries of each phase. But what about all the activity within those phases? Is that where Agile comes in?
Exactly. Inside each phase, you can use those agile principles and practices to really manage the work. Break down tasks into smaller chunks, prioritize them, and, use techniques like sprints or Kanban boards to keep track of progress.
So we're essentially creating like mini Agile environments, but within that bigger waterfall structure.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So you get that flexibility and adaptation within each phase, but you still maintain that, that overall project structure and predictability. And I bet this is especially helpful for remote teams, right?
Mhm.
Because you've got those clear sync points. You don't need to be communicating 24/7.
Exactly. It strikes a really good balance.
This hybrid approach sounds really promising, but I remember you mentioned a potential pitfall earlier, something called scrum fall.
Mm.
What exactly is that, and like why should we be, watching out for it?
Oh, yes. Scrumfall. You could think of it as like the awkward middle child of project management. It's that forced marriage of agile and waterfall that ends up being, well, the worst of both worlds.
Okay, that definitely sounds like something we want to avoid.
Yeah.
So how do we spot scrum fall, and more importantly, how do we make sure our hybrid approach is actually, working the way it should?
Well, scrumfall usually pops up when you misunderstand or misapply those agile and waterfall principles. It's kind of like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. You get a system that's neither truly agile nor truly waterfall, and that just leads to confusion and frustration.
So how do we avoid falling into that scrum fall trap?
Yeah.
How do we ensure that our hybrid is that, harmonious blend rather than a Frankensteinian monster?
You have to be deliberate and strategic in how you combine them. It's not about blindly applying both methodologies everywhere. It's about carefully choosing where each approach actually makes sense and ensuring that they complement rather than, clash with each other.
Okay, so it's about understanding those strengths and weaknesses,
Yeah.
using them strategically to create that customized approach, something that truly fits our team and our project.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we'll dig into further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore those specific strategies for structuring that hybrid model, how to manage communication and collaboration, and how to really dodge those common pitfalls that lead to, scrum fall.
Sounds good. I'm already looking forward to it.
So we were talking about creating this hybrid approach, right? Blending the best of Agile and Waterfall to really address what your team and project need. Let's dig into how we actually structure this thing.
The more we talk about this hybrid model, the more I'm thinking, yeah, this could be it. This could be the answer. But like, where do we even begin? How do we go from like this big idea to something we can actually use?
It all starts with like drawing those lines in the sand. Where does Agile stop and Waterfall begin? Remember that house we were talking about?
Yeah, the blueprint and all that.
Right. Think of it like this. Waterfall, that's for the structure, the foundation of the house. Agile, that's where you get to play around inside each room.
Okay, so those high-level phases, gathering requirements, design, development, testing, deployment,
Yeah.
those become our waterfall milestones, like the walls of the house.
Exactly. And those milestones, they're your key sync points. Everyone knows where they are in the project, what's expected, and when.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we keep those milestones from becoming like, these rigid barriers? I don't want to lose that agile flexibility.
That's the beauty of the hybrid. Inside each of those waterfall phases, you can empower your team to use those agile principles. It's like mini agile environments.
So instead of like daily stand-ups for the whole project, maybe we have them just within a specific phase, like during those development sprints.
You got it. And those big phase end reviews, those are crucial moments for feedback, course correction, making sure the whole team is aligned.
It's especially helpful for those remote teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Clear checkpoints, less need for constant communication.
Exactly. It strikes a really good balance.
Okay, so what about tools? Is there anything that can help us manage this hybrid approach, practically?
Oh, for sure. Tools can be lifesavers, especially when everyone's remote. For the waterfall side, Gantt charts are your friends.
Gantt charts, yeah, okay. I've seen those.
They visually map out those milestones, dependencies, the whole project timeline. Everyone sees that big picture.
So everyone's got the roadmap thanks to the Gantt chart. But how do we manage those mini agile environments within each phase? What about those?
That's where something like a Kanban board can be super helpful. Visualize the workflow, track progress in those sprints, spot any bottlenecks.
And Kanban boards are digital, right?
Mm.
So perfect for keeping the remote team in the loop. Everyone sees what's happening no matter where they are.
Exactly. Right tool for the right job.
I like it. But, switching to a hybrid model, it feels Big, like a lot of change. How do we get everyone on board and make sure that transition goes smoothly?
Communication is key. Be transparent. Get the team involved in designing this whole hybrid thing. They need to understand why we're doing this, the benefits, how their roles might shift a bit.
So it's a collaborative effort, not just like a top-down decree.
Exactly. When people understand the why, they're much more likely to, embrace the change and really contribute to making it work. Don't forget training and support too. Make sure everyone knows how to use those new tools and navigate the new process.
Right? So empower the team to succeed within this new framework. But, we talked about Scrumfall earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Those, let's call them less than ideal hybrid attempts. How do we make sure ours isn't one of those? How do we make sure it's a genuine blend, not a monster?
One of the biggest red flags is when you try to cram those agile practices into a rigid waterfall structure. You're forcing it and it just won't work.
So no blindly adding sprints or stand-ups just because they're like agile things.
Yeah.
Got it. We have to be thoughtful about which agile pieces fit within each phase.
Exactly. And be flexible, adaptable. That's the whole point of a hybrid, right?
Yeah.
Adjust as you go, see what works. If something's not working, don't be afraid to try something different.
Find that balance between structure and flexibility. The sweet spot where Agile and Waterfall can actually coexist? Okay, I'm with you. But how do we know if we're actually doing this right? What does success look like in a hybrid model? How do we even measure that?
Ugh, that's the million-dollar question. When you're blending methodologies, you have to pick metrics that align with that blend. Don't go crazy trying to track every single thing. Focus on a few key indicators that tell you, okay, this hybrid is working for us.
So instead of just looking at, traditional agile metrics like velocity, maybe we also track things like milestone completion rates or, how many issues we're finding in those phase end reviews.
Exactly. Pick the metrics that reflect what's unique about your hybrid and what's most important for your team's success.
This is super helpful. I mean, we've gone from this vague idea of a hybrid model to like actually having a plan, how to structure the project, how to manage the team, even which metrics to track. But I have to confess, I'm still a little bit, attached to Agile. Is there any way to keep some of those Agile principles, even if we're moving towards a more waterfall-driven approach?
Of course. The goal here is to find the best fit, right? Not to be a slave to any methodology. If there are agile practices that are working really well for your team, keep them. Integrate them into those waterfall phases.
So it's not like an all or nothing thing. It's about taking the best from both worlds and creating something that really fits how we work.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it. It's about being flexible, adaptable, and finding the most effective way to deliver value.
Love it. This has been so enlightening. Agile, waterfall, hybrids. We've really covered a lot. But there's one last thing I want to touch on before we, move on. You mentioned earlier that in some cases, pure waterfall might actually be a viable option. I know it sounds crazy in this like agile obsessed world we live in, but given my situation, small team, well-defined requirements, is that something we should actually consider?
It's funny, right? Waterfall has become this forbidden word in software development, but sometimes going back to basics can be the most innovative thing you can do. If Agile isn't really adding value and you're confident in those requirements, Waterfall might actually be simpler and more efficient.
Okay, I'll admit I'm intrigued, but what would pure waterfall even look like today? And how do we know if it's the right fit?
First, let's bust some waterfall myths. It always gets painted as this rigid, inflexible dinosaur, totally out of touch with modern software development. But that's not necessarily true. Waterfall can be adaptable, especially when you emphasize planning, communication, risk management.
So it's not about blindly following a checklist. It's about applying those waterfall principles intelligently.
Right. And the key to doing waterfall well is meticulous planning upfront. Get those requirements, define the scope, create a detailed project plan, every phase, every deliverable, every dependency. You wouldn't build a house without a blueprint, would you?
No, definitely not. But how do we make sure that blueprint is, actually accurate, that it reflects what the project really needs? That's one of the big criticisms of waterfall, right? You end up with a product that misses the mark because you didn't get enough feedback along the way.
Valid point, and it's something to be very mindful of. While waterfall is about upfront planning, it doesn't mean you can't get feedback or make adjustments. You just have to build in those feedback loops at strategic points.
So instead of waiting until the very end to get feedback, maybe we schedule check-ins with stakeholders after each major phase wraps up. That way we can course correct to make sure we're still on track.
Exactly. And even within those phases, you can still have some flexibility, some iteration, break those tasks down into smaller chunks. Use Kanban boards to track progress, all that good stuff. Balance, that's the key.
So waterfall isn't necessarily this rigid monolithic thing. It can be, in its own way, kind of agile. As long as you're thoughtful about it,
Hmm?
keep those communication channels open.
Exactly. Understand the principles, apply them intelligently.
Wow, this is really eye-opening. Maybe waterfall's got more life in it than we thought. But let's be real. Going full waterfall, that's a big decision.
Mhm.
What are some things we absolutely need to think about before even considering this?
The first thing, be brutally honest about those requirements. Are you sure they're well defined? Are they likely to change? Because waterfall, it's all about predictability, right? If those specs keep shifting, it's going to be a nightmare.
Right, constantly changing the blueprint. You'll never finish building a house.
Exactly. Then think about your team. How do they work best? Waterfall tends to be more, top-down, clear roles and responsibilities. If your team thrives on that agile autonomy and flexibility, waterfall could be a tough transition.
It's not just about the process, it's about the culture, the team dynamic.
And finally, what's your motivation here? Are you genuinely trying to find a better fit, or are you chasing the latest trends? Because sometimes the best solution is the one you already have. Don't change just because everyone else is.
So find what works for you. Don't just follow the crowd.
Exactly. There's no magic formula in software development. Understand the options, choose what aligns best with your team, your project, your goals.
This has been incredible. Really challenged my assumptions about Agile and Waterfall, learned about hybrid models, even discovered that Waterfall might not be dead after all. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. What if we've been, a little too quick to dismiss those classic approaches? Like maybe Agile isn't always the be-all and end-all.
Sometimes the best way to move forward is to, take a step back, re-examine those fundamentals.
Right. Maybe it's time to, I don't know, dust off that waterfall playbook. Or at least, seriously consider a hybrid approach. Get
Yeah.
that best of both worlds.
If you're feeling bogged down by Agile, if you're craving that focus, that boost in throughput, a way to really streamline how your remote team works together, maybe Waterfall or that well-crafted hybrid, is exactly what you need.
And, you don't have to figure this out alone. We've got tons of resources linked in the episode description. Articles, templates, even a quiz to help you, really figure out which methodology is right for you.
Don't be afraid to experiment, to really get in there and see what works.
Mhm.
You might be surprised at what you discover when you step outside that Agile bubble.
It's about finding what works for your team, your project, your goals, not just following the crowd.
Exactly. Find your own path, your own way to success.
Who knows? Maybe we'll all rediscover the power of simplicity and focus in a world that's, obsessed with complexity and constant change. That's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.